Tonight, we begin with a development that U.S. officials had feared, tracked, and prepared for. A crisis that unfolded not over weeks, but in hours. Hours that tested Ukraine's resolve. Hours that forced Washington's hand. Hours that changed this war's trajectory. What Vladimir Putin did today crossed a line that the United States had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, speed, and overwhelming force. For weeks now, there had been signals, not official warnings, not public statements, just signals that Putin was preparing something different. Russia has been aggressive, yes, but they have been predictable in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a formula. But what set off alarm bells in Washington this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Russian military activity know the indicators. The pre-positioning of missile systems, the movement of specialized units, the communication patterns between commanders, the sudden cessation of routine operations, all of that went quiet. And whenever Putin goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early this morning, U.S. intelligence detected what they described as large-scale military repositioning, including weapon systems that had not been deployed this close to Ukrainian territory in over 8 months. These are the kinds of assets that Russia only deploys when signaling something specific: imminent escalation, strategic repositioning, or preparation for major operations. Western observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Putin was changing military posture. And when nuclear powers shift posture without explanation, even by small measures, Washington pays attention. The warning issued by the United States tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Senior officials after emergency consultations described Putin's move as destabilizing, reckless, and perhaps most importantly, inconsistent with any path toward de-escalation. But warnings only work if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the most decisive we've seen in this conflict. Within 4 hours of the Russian repositioning, Ukraine launched coordinated strikes. These weren't standard artillery exchanges. These were long-range precision strikes, weapons systems that Ukraine only deploys when preparing to neutralize high-value targets. Tonight, Ukrainian military sources confirmed that they launched strikes on multiple Russian positions, including forward command posts recently established for what analysts believe was preparation for renewed offensive operations. Ukraine struck before Russia could activate defensive systems. They hit ammunition depots. They hit electronic warfare stations. They hit fuel storage facilities likely preparing to support offensive operations. In other words, Ukraine targeted the infrastructure, the logistics that would have made Putin's escalation operational. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Putin's move wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of escalation that could spiral if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't hit civilian areas. They didn't strike deep into Russian territory. They hit military infrastructure directly connected to the threat. And here's where the story becomes even more critical. Western intelligence officials now believe that Putin's latest move was designed to test Ukrainian defenses after months of sustained combat. Putin wanted to see whether Ukraine would delay, whether Western support would waver. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't delay. They launched a response so swift, so coordinated, that even Russian commanders were caught off guard. You don't get Putin's attention easily. But today, Ukraine did. Defense analysts describe Putin's shift as probing a way to identify vulnerabilities. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and determined. Their strikes were timed so precisely that Russian units had minimal opportunity to relocate. That timing shows intelligence coordination. It shows that Ukraine is not fighting blind. They are fighting with real-time information As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about Ukraine's response. Ukrainian forces carried out at least 12 separate strikes, forcing Russian units to relocate. Long-range systems targeted supply routes established in the last 72 hours. Ukrainian drones reportedly hit communications infrastructure used to coordinate operations. This wasn't just tactical response. This wasn't just defensive posturing. This was operational disruption. This was strategic messaging. And strategic messaging is the one thing Putin has struggled to control since this war began. Remember, Putin thought Ukraine would collapse within days. He thought Western support would fracture within weeks. He thought exhaustion would set in within months. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Ukraine is striking with precision. Western intelligence is flowing in real time. And Putin's escalation has triggered not capitulation, but retaliation. What makes this moment so dangerous and so significant is that Putin's latest move happened when he is under mounting domestic pressure. Hardliners want faster territorial gains. Moderates want negotiated exits. The military wants sustainable strategy. The public wants results. Putin is balancing these demands while managing economic strain and international isolation. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The United States' warning, now circulating through diplomatic channels, was designed to signal that Washington is not willing to allow unchecked escalation. Senior officials said plainly that Russia's repositioning was inconsistent with any commitment to de-escalation. That is diplomatic language for, we see what you're doing, and it will not be ignored. You don't usually hear that tone unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed the nation in a brief, defiant speech tonight. He said, "We will not wait for threats to become reality." He said, "Our defenders act with precision and purpose." And he said, "Every escalation will meet its answer." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Putin's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the military repositioning, Russian naval vessels increased activity near critical infrastructure. Cyber attacks targeting Ukrainian communications spiked. Russian state media intensified rhetoric targeting Western weapons. All of this happened within the same 48-hour window. When Putin moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin is preparing a new offensive push in the coming weeks. Another is that Putin is attempting to force negotiations from perceived strength. A third possibility, the one worrying officials most, is that Putin is attempting to fracture Western resolve before winter. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for confirmation. They didn't hesitate. They struck first. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Putin wants to see if Ukraine will blink. Ukraine wants to show they will not. The United States wants to prevent uncontrolled escalation, and Europe wants to prevent the crisis from expanding. Tonight, we've heard from NATO officials who are now monitoring the situation hour by hour. They say Russia has not yet retaliated against Ukraine's strikes. They say communications between Moscow and Western capitals remain open. And they say Putin's decision to reposition forces is likely part of a broader strategy to regain initiative. But Ukraine is not backing down. Their response today, swift, targeted, and effective, sent a message to Putin that escalation comes with consequences. And it sent a message to Washington that Western support is not being wasted. As the hours go on, we expect more details to emerge about what Putin hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the U.S. warning was timely. It signaled awareness. It demonstrated alliance coordination. And it reinforced that escalation will not be ignored. What happens next will depend on what Putin does in the next 72 hours. If he pulls back, this moment will be remembered as a failed test. If he escalates further, Ukraine has already shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, Moscow is quiet. The Kremlin is quiet. Too quiet. And when Putin is quiet, it means he is calculating. It means he is choosing his next move very carefully. Because tonight, Putin learned something he has learned many times before. Ukraine will not collapse. The West will not abandon them. And escalation will always be met with force. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Ukraine struck back decisively. Washington stood firm. And Putin's gamble did not pay off. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.